I'm glad that you could take an hour, the next 57 minutes or so, to talk about a topic that we need to explore, because when we talk about addiction and gambling addiction, it's always good to take a look at the at-risk groups from a prevention and a treatment perspective. And one of the at-risk groups that we're going to focus on today is the criminal justice population, the forensic population, where you might have a mental health condition tied in with a criminal justice involved individual. Because oftentimes what we see is people that do suffer from mental health issues can have a range of other issues, right? And some of them are addiction. Some, we talk about bipolar, anxiety, depression, mood disorder. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And what we have to realize is that some people who are incarcerated also have co-occurring mental health conditions. They also have addiction issues. They also have certain personality traits that lend themselves to risk taking. So oftentimes we see a lot of connected activities and connected behaviors. So we want to explore today the role of criminal justice involvement as it pertains to gambling addiction, because in the prison system, a lot of gambling takes place. I love the work that I do because I'm thankful to be 11 and a half years in recovery. My last bet was February 11th, 2010. So not quite 11 and a half years, 11 years, 3 months, if you will. And during that time, I have the privilege and opportunity to work with great people like Robbie, come to great states like North Carolina, Illinois. I go around the country talking about addiction to gambling because it's lived experience for me. But this one also is very personal to me because I did spend time away because of the activity that I found myself involved with was of a criminal nature to further my gambling addiction. And so when I'm talking to you for the next 55 minutes about the criminal justice system, about prison, it's not just something I've seen on TV. It's not something I've just read in books. I live there. I've been there. I went through the process, the slow, painful process that I put myself in. And it was a journey. So you're hearing some firsthand experience as well as the reason why we need to consider this population. I have a lot of slides. I tend to provide more slides than I need. So there's 37 slides for a 1 hour workshop, which is way too many. But that's okay, because some of them are pictures, some of them are quick slides. At the end of the day, I share my PowerPoint as a PDF. You're entitled to have it. I love sharing knowledge so that now you can become ambassadors and that you can take the knowledge you've learned today and share it with other people in your circle, in your community, in your workplace. Okay. So we also have a great video today. I don't like to talk the whole time. Throughout the pandemic, starting in last March, we worked with Rutgers University, and 2 weeks after the pandemic hit and everything was shut down, early to mid-March, I delivered a 6-hour virtual workshop to Rutgers University drug and alcohol counselors. That was a long presentation. I had one video. I think I felt more sorry for the people listening to me for the 6 hours. And what I quickly learned during virtual workshops, mix in some videos, keep it changing up, because the social interaction that we're lacking, you can instead kind of replicate that by changing up the mode of learning. So I love to have some video, love to have some lecture, and I also love to see what's happening in the chat, because this is your workshop. I want you to take something away today. Take a nugget away. Take something that you've heard differently, something that you learned new, maybe never heard it before, or something that you can apply personally and or professionally. So let's get moving. We're going to take a look at gambling and the prison culture today. So what makes a group vulnerable? What makes a group at risk, right? Sometimes we think about experiences. I think about adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs. And when I read through the ACEs, when I think about the ACEs, it's not just all the negative stuff that happens in your life. It's a combination of both positive and negative. It helps to understand and helps to explain why an individual, two people can grow up in the same house. I was talking to a girl at a local college. She was 19, and her brother she had a twin brother, also 19. They grew up in a house where the father was in prison, the father drank, the father did drugs. Terrible, right? Lot going on. They saw abuse, they were victims of neglect, parent in prison, a lot of those negative experiences. But she couldn't understand why She is choosing a path to become a counselor and help other people, yet her brother is now following in the dad's path of drug use, alcohol misuse, yelling at their mother, right? Just like dad does. She says, how can two people grow up and see the same thing and go two totally different paths? I think it's a great question. And we don't know the exact answer. We know that addiction in itself is biopsychosocial. We know there's genetic components, but we also know experiences, the positive and the negative experiences do weigh in. So we don't know why. Maybe the daughter had more positive experiences than the son had. I don't know, but I think it's a valid question. Other things that makes a group vulnerable: lack of access to resources, right? Lack of access to knowledge, to education, barriers. Cognitive decline. When we talk about vulnerable populations and vulnerable groups, people perhaps as they age, cognitive decline sets in. We know some studies have shown video gaming, which a lot of people are very concerned about, can actually have some positive effects among the older generations according to along the lifespan. It slows cognitive decline. It can help improve executive functioning. It helps with coordination, peripheral vision. So there are some benefits to video gaming amongst the older population to help slow cognitive decline. What else makes a group vulnerable? A high number of adverse childhood experiences. We talked about that. According to a study that was done, and forgive me, I don't recall the year. This is a chart from that study. If someone had, how common are the ACEs? 36% of the respondents had 0 ACEs. So 1/3 of people had 0 adverse childhood experiences, and 2/3 had, 1 all the way ranging up to 4 or more. And as the number of adverse childhood experiences where you have a lot of that negativity increases, the higher likelihood a person is at risk for developing problems such as addiction, mental health issues, right? Obesity, anger issues. There's a whole list. Also, what makes a group vulnerable is unresolved trauma or PTSD. So important that if you're working with clients or you're working with individuals within even the forensic population, the prison population, there's trauma there. Going to prison and having freedom stripped from you is traumatic. Now, we understand that people commit different types of crimes. There's white collar crimes, there's physical crimes, there's a whole range of crimes. And I'm not here to judge whether or not the person deserves to be in prison or doesn't. That's not the purpose. It's rather to say that the experience, the shared, the lived experience of sentencing, of being had handcuffs on, led off to prison, and going through that process and then being in a confined space for an extended period of time has an effect on a person. So it's important that we consider that. So when someone's at risk or feeling vulnerable, often what do? Well, they escape. Sometimes people just want to escape. People just want to veg out. They just want a safe place. So it could be drinking, it could be using drugs. Some people like to argue and yell and vent, let off some steam, right? Some people laugh. Do you know of anyone who laughs when they're feeling vulnerable? When they're feeling at risk, they laugh, they isolate, they just don't want to talk to anyone. They try to control every little thing because the other things in their life that are spiraling out of control, they can't figure out how to fix or work on. So they'll try to control the other stuff. I know when I was struggling with my gambling addiction, I would come home when I was married back with my ex-wife. I would come home at the end of the day, having lost a sizable amount of money, having just embezzled more money, knowing that someday this would all fall apart, but I didn't know when. And I would sit down on a couch and I would move the drink coaster 6 inches from the left to the right. And I remember my ex-wife looking at me one day saying, "Why do you just move the drink coaster?" I said, "I don't know. I just want it here." And that was just a small example of trying to control something when everything else is spiraling out of control. The only thing I could find to control that made me feel somewhat productive was moving a drink coaster 6 inches to the right. So in prison, we talk about gambling. Because when someone is incarcerated and you have that environment, people will gamble. let's just level set ourselves here. There's typically three types of gamblers. You have the social gamblers, which makes up a majority of society, people who can gamble responsibly for fun. It does not create harm in their lives. It's a form of entertainment. They have their limits, right? They have the limit of money. They have their time limits, and they stop when they're done. They're not preoccupied. They're not chasing. It's not creating life disturbances. Then you have a continuum, right? As we move along this continuum, now we start to see problem gamblers. People who are starting to gamble longer than planned. They're losing a bit more than they intended. They're perhaps starting to borrow money, maybe losing, playing, chasing. You'll start to hear something very interesting. You'll start to hear a person become very possessive with their pronouns. So they'll say, I have to go back to the casino to get my money back. The casino has my money and I'm going to get it, right? They get very possessive. It's no longer a form of entertainment. When you have a bad dinner, do you go back to the restaurant to get your money back? No, you had a bad dinner. You just write them a bad Yelp review and you go find another restaurant. And that's the end of it. If you see a bad movie, you're not going to demand to have your money back for a bad movie. That's why they have Rotten Tomato scores and Google reviews, right? Let the buyer beware. But in the casino, it's not seen as a form of entertainment because you lost money and you have this opportunity and chance to win. I was presenting in Delaware yesterday and I showed a video of a gentleman who chronicled an 11-year span of his life. He's called the Roulette Man. Roulette Man? I think it's the Roulette Man. I met him when I was in Denver a number of years ago. And he was out in Vegas and he had a gambling addiction. And he basically chronicled his gambling addiction through his video recorder, similar to his smartphone. And his life basically centered around going to the pawn shops, going to the payday loan places, just to get enough money to try to get back to the casino to win. And he said it all started with his first $5 play. He put $5 into Action Max, a slot machine at the Palms in Las Vegas, and he won $80. And he said that felt so good, and he thought it was easy money, and he wouldn't have to work anymore. And we hear that so often. For people who start to experience gambling problems, they can usually recall a time when they won, that early win where it felt so good. But there's something different about a gambler who has a gambling problem. It's not a damaged brain. It's not that they're morally weak. They process things differently, right? I know for myself, I can't gamble. I've tried harm reduction. It didn't work. For me, abstinence is the only way that works for me. Other people have different experience. The agency we work for is neutral on gambling. We're neither for nor against gambling. We want to help people who have gambling problems like you're seeing on this screen. But we also know that people who do experience gambling related harms are not alone because the family members also impacted. So as we move through today and we're talking about gambling, we're talking about prison culture, we also have to be mindful of the necessity for connection, the recovery process, the aftercare. When a person comes out of prison, what does that network look like? What does that social network look like? And I'll kind of walk through a little bit of a brief case study in my life of how my journey went. I'll share that with you as we move through a little bit later on. When we talk about types of gamblers, the third type is traditionally clinically diagnosed as having gambling disorder, as defined in the DSM-5. And that is the only non-substance related disorder that was added to the DSM-5. So it puts it on par with substance use disorder in terms of the effects on the individual. Now we realize and we recognize that substance use and gambling do have some differences, right? You can't overdose from gambling. You don't have to go to a detox facility from a gambling addiction. We understand that. There are also, though, several similarities, because now you start talking about the preoccupation, the isolation. It continues despite negative consequences. And you can start to say, oh, wow, it sounds like just what substance is too. It's addiction. It's addiction. And as we move through what we know about disordered gamblers, the national surveys seem to indicate that roughly 1% to 2% of Americans will suffer with gambling disorder. You know, I think we've been using the same numbers now for so long, but what has changed is that gambling is expanding across the country. In New Jersey alone, internet gambling was legalized in 2013 and sports betting was legalized in 2018. Our disordered gambling rate in the state of New Jersey is 6.3%, as measured by Rutgers University study done in 2018. That's 3 times the national average because we have availability and accessibility, right? So now, as more states are adding sports betting to their bills, they're adding internet gambling opportunities to their bills, they're expanding gambling. Don't we think it's time to do an updated national prevalence study to really start asking some hard questions? Because I think what we'll find is that the gambling disorder rate and the problem gambling rate is increasing, especially in those states where you're starting to see internet availability. You can sit in your own home and gamble on the internet. You can sit on your couch and gamble. My couch is this way, and gamble on the internet, right? That's exactly, you don't have to go anywhere. It's simple. Gambling comes to you. You don't have to go gamble. You've just reduced that barrier. And then for those in prison, it's a daily activity. They don't they don't gamble with money in prison. There's no money. It's not allowed. But they have currency. They have commissary. That's their currency. That's their medium of exchange. Could be mackerel packs, could be tuna fish packs, could be peanut butter, crackers, could be push-ups. It could be bets on the prison office pool. So there's lots of activity that goes on in prison for gambling. At the poker table, when I was in prison, they had always had a poker table. I didn't gamble in prison. Matter of fact, gambling is what led me to prison. So I wasn't going to gamble in prison. When I first got to prison, I found 2 guys that were really much bigger than I was and had a lot more muscle than I did. And I went up to them. I said, listen, if you ever see me sitting at any of those tables over there or gambling, beat the shit out of me. Excuse my language. That was a quote. I said, because I need to protect myself. And the way I protect myself is by staying away from the gambling. And that's when I knew I was serious about recovery. Is that I had people now watching out, and I paid them. I would pay them whenever I order commissary once a month. They didn't have to do anything, but I appreciated having two big brothers watching over me to make sure that I wasn't slipping up. And I know they would have taken care of me if they found me. That's why I chose the biggest guys I could find. So let's take a look at gambling behavior and its connection with criminal activity. I want to take a moment now to show a video. This was produced out of Maryland. Dr. Lori Rugel is someone many of you are probably familiar with. She's a wonderful clinician and a wonderful human being. She's a good friend, and she has just such a way about her. She creates a safe place no matter where she is. And she went into a prison in Maryland, and they filmed 3 gentlemen who just struggled with opioids, gambling, and that led to prison. And they just kind of talk about their experience, and they kind of talk about gambling and opiates and their prison stay. It's about a 14-minute video, but it'll lead into the next part of the discussion. So please take a look in the chat. Feel free to add commentary, observations, whatever you find of interest, and I hope you enjoy the video.
Dropped out like 10th grade, started getting in the streets, started getting locked up, selling drugs. I'm using, going to jail, going to jail. And I did that my whole life. I wasted my whole life with these drugs, getting high, gambling. I went all the way to like the 11th grade, dropped out, and started acting like a fool. Hanging out, like selling drugs. I would sell drugs, but I didn't mess with them. But then, you be around long enough, one day you picked it up and tried it, you know what I mean? And I was going for that ride. We've been together ever since, the heroin thing, still like shooting dice and all that, prison thing I done all that, and crazy. I just be trying to keep moving, trying to do the right things.
Don't be mad at when I take all your money.
I'll reach in my pocket, take some of the winning money, and just go buy 2 sets of dice. Said, we're gonna finish this. Then I lose everything. The next day, I was fortunate, it was allowance time. Got my allowance, a little extra couple dollars, lunch money. I took all that and put it into gambling. I just kept making all the wrong decisions. most addicts think they got a hold of their addiction, like it's a on and off switch that we can control. And it's not like that. My miracle addiction started in prison by, I guess, being around older guys that I knew, grew up with on the streets.
Gambling is often called the hidden addiction. It's not talked about, it's not seen. You don't test for it with blood or urine, so it goes unnoticed. The individuals we'll see today have the courage and the honesty to talk about how gambling has affected their lives and their recoveries, how it becomes a cycle of one addictive behavior after another, with one fueling another.
For a number of years, people have noticed that there's obviously a higher amount of substance abuse associated with gambling. And in particular, it seems to be more in opiate treatment programs. So methadone programs, places where they use buprenorphine or Suboxone. But in particular, methadone programs seem to have high rates where even 50% of the patients may have at least problematic gambling. So it's really important for programs to kind of reassess this periodically and find ways to build it into the other things that they're talking to people about.
What I'd just like to ask you first is tell me a little bit about what gambling is like and what that's about in the community.
You walk 2 blocks, you're gonna find a dice game.
Yeah.
You walk 2.5 blocks, you're gonna find a drug corner.
Yeah.
And like they say, when you try to reverse all that to become a better person, and that old saying they use in the rooms about you change the people, places, and things. The things you can change, but the people is everywhere you go. So you can't escape it.
No.
When I go to the bus stop, they shoot dice. It's every day. So we shoot dice when the bus coming. So it's been days where I ain't shot and lost my money where I couldn't even catch the bus to get down to the program, because I live up in the Pimlico racetrack. That's a nice little ways to come down here to go to the program. So whereas though you combat a heroin problem, what we put like is you dealing with a heroin problem, and now you got a gambling problem. I like playing cards. Yeah. I like playing cards. First, you start out by pitching quarters, nickels, then start playing cards. Then start getting, between the drugs and the gambling, I left the gambling alone and started messing with the drugs, And then I came back to the gambling all over again. Just come out.
Keep looking at gambling like it's okay because it's a legal form with some of them that you're not being specific about, like the craps and stuff like that. So they making that like it's okay, but like we always mention it's just a dangerous trade.
Gambling is this way of life to get by, to get through, to provide the hope, to be a solution where there don't seem to be any other solutions. How do you see those being connected? The heroin addiction and the gambling?
They do go hand in hand, but it's just havoc with the gambling.
Much worse, ain't it though? Because and then you gotta look at this too. They making stuff so legal now. Like especially let me tell you, I got to wear these scratch offs, and it just seems though. I don't know what they do. They let you win a couple times. I'm serious. You might win $2 here, $5 there. And I'll be like, yeah. And you wind up spending the same money back again, you lose. So you're like, all right. I had an all right day. But you lost your money. Then you go back again, you do the same thing over and over and over. It's legal. And then when they set that casino in the middle of the ghetto, that was one of the worst things they could have did. You know what I mean?
I don't care how you look at it. Is real dangerous. You don't know when it's gonna kick off. The same way with the drugs. you know, whether it become, you know, a crime activity or an overdose. You know, the minute you put it in you, you gone. Or the minute you get it, to go put it in you, somebody robbing you, and most of the time, they gonna kill you.
You know how they say no to drugs?
Yeah.
I say no to all of it. Because one leads to the other one leads to another one. So all the outcomes gonna be negative. It's gonna be the same, you know. So no matter how what positivity you can think of, it's gonna all end up the same way. We sitting here battling not just a drug problem. You be sitting up here battling a gambling problem too.
Because you caught in the cycle, which become that revolving door.
The drug problems can be obvious, the gambling problems not so much, but when we realize they're all connected and the stories are intertwined,
About 13.
that's what's really powerful. Do you ever know anybody who got hurt or killed?
Yeah.
My son was a result of a bad dice game that made the wrong turn, but he wasn't a participant in the game. You know, somebody lost their money. Now they want to draw weapons. And it don't be you go back home and get your weapon because that person might be gone by the time you get back, so they bring it with him.
Yeah.
You know, the minute you lose it, you know, they drawing their weapons out, and when they drew the weapons out, before you know it, 2 rounds go off and shot the little girl and my son.
I'm so sorry.
You know, and I thought that would at least stop me. It didn't stop me. It only stopped my thinking not to shoot dice no more. But like I said, as soon as I get out, I'm doing the same thing that he got killed from, you know?
You know, everybody standing there looking like, man, they're crazy. So when he went to let me take my chain, he put the gun in my neck. I'm like, all right. He took it all, took the money, but I said, I know where he be at. I was mad and crazy at the same time. Like, I know where he be at. We go around that way he be at, but when we get around there, he already dead.
Yeah.
Somebody done shot him, I got my chain back.
You done lost it in a split second, and you don't have no satisfaction. So now, you don't know what's running in your mind. Should I go get the next thing? It ain't gonna be a $10, it might be a gun.
And how do you think gambling is connected to just, you know, not having money, feeling like you won't be able to get a job? You know, how's it connected to all the issues that folks are dealing with?
Sometimes that be the only way. You know, I know as a guy, he shoot dice, and that's, he know if he don't win, he not gonna eat. You know, so some people feel though they don't have no alternative but to choose that road.
Each addiction with gambling and narcotics, you're some type of fiend. With the gambling, you're a hope fiend.
Right.
You know, you can't separate none of them.
Gambling is the hope. Gambling is my way out of my drug addiction, my history of incarceration, my history of poverty. It may be the only way out, especially if I've got a history of substance use, a history of poverty, and a felony conviction. What else is going to be life-changing?
I want to stop it there because I think Lori brings up a great point when she says, you know, some people see gambling as the way out of poverty, a way out of an economically disadvantaged neighborhood, a way out of their drug addiction. I've heard many people say, I won't take drugs anymore if I could just win more money. It doesn't seem to make sense, but it does in their mind to say, I won't have this need or this desire to inject a drug into my body, to snort cocaine. If I could just gamble and win enough, then life will be better, right? I'll be happy when, right? We hear that so often. You know, it's such an amazing phrase when you hear somebody talk about being happy or content or finding joy. You know, I'll be happy when I get a new job, when I finish my move. I'm moving this week, right? And I know some of you Others on here have moved recently or in the process of moving. It's a stressful time. So I've challenged myself to change the thinking from I'll be happy when I'm done moving to I'll be happy even though I'm moving. Because how many times in life do we think we'll be happy when something's done and then we're still not happy? So changing that mentality to say, despite whatever's happening, I'm going to choose happiness. I'm going to choose gratitude, right? And working with our clients, working with people who have gone through difficult life circumstances, helping them to reframe their thinking on joy, on happiness. Now, why does this matter? When we're dealing with people coming out of prison, we have to think about everything that they've lost time, they've lost their freedom, they've lost perhaps a skill set or two, they've lost resources, perhaps driver's license, transportation, employment, residency. There's a lot that's weighing on them. So it's not easy to find happiness or joy when all of those things are lacking. So what we do know is that joy and happiness and gratitude produce dopamine organically. So instead of the gambling rush that produces dopamine or the drugs, right? How about getting on a program of exercise, of a good diet, of laughing on a daily basis, finding things to be happy about, accomplishing goals, goal setting, and then accomplishing them. Very important. We don't want to minimize accomplishing a goal. It produces dopamine organically, and that's very good. So let's take a look at a model that was put together. I believe this was from SAMHSA. It is. It's called the Sequential Intercept Model for Criminal Justice. And what this looked at, this was done in 2012 by SAMHSA. They focused on the interaction between the community and law enforcement for those who have mental health conditions that are entering the criminal realm. So now they're starting to commit crimes, starting to become involved in criminal justice type activities. And there's oftentimes a series of points along a continuum where there can be an intersection to help an individual who's going down that pathway, because our goal is to try to prevent them from falling deeper into the system, right? One of the challenges is once someone is in the system, we talk about recidivism, and the rate of recidivism is so high, it's that revolving door. Because once you're so deep and you're struggling so much, you come back out, you don't have resources, you don't have services. So I'm going to commit another crime to make ends meet. And now I'm going back into the system, right? It makes it very difficult. So what this looks at the community level, that's intercept number one. That's where you have your local law enforcement, the boots on the ground on a daily basis, community affairs, people trying to help out those in need. I was walking down the street the other day in the town in which I'm moving to, and I saw a gentleman walking in the middle of the road at 2:00 on a Wednesday afternoon. He was staggering. That's not a normal thing to see. So I made a phone call over to the local law enforcement. I said, hey, I'm concerned. I said, he's not being violent. He's not doing anything other than being unsafe. And he could potentially cause a situation if drivers might hit him, they might swerve, hit someone else, might, he might have harm brought upon him. So I said, I'm just calling. And sure enough, cops came, and he's someone that they know about in town who does struggle with a couple of different mental health issues. So getting him safe and secure was paramount. And the right things and the right steps were taken. Intercept number two is when you have someone who now is found to be guilty of a criminal activity, and now they're starting to become investigated, or there's a sentencing, an indictment, anything along those lines, you start having your initial detention, your court hearings. Sometimes people are held in jail for a short period of time. Sometimes that's the only intervention that's needed, right? Held in jail, that's enough for me. I don't want to go back to jail. I'm going to start changing my life. I'm going to start making some changes, right? Sometimes going to court can be that intercept point that changes. And the judge can decide, hey, bail hearing, you're going to jail or you're out on bail. Let's square things away here, right? Maybe a warning, maybe a fine. We don't know. Number three, when we start getting further along this to the right, we start to see more involvement. So now we're talking about spending the time in jail, going to courts, going to prison. And specialty court's an interesting one along Intercept 3. In New Jersey last week, a bill was finally introduced on May 12th, which will be pushing for the state's first gambling treatment diversion court pilot program. We're working with Honorable Judge, the retired Judge Cheryl Moss from Nevada. Also, one of our former treatment coordinators, George Maldenitz, is helping to lead this charge with lobbyists, with some assembly folks, and we finally have a bill number. And now we're working towards having this very first pilot program, a specialty court for people with gambling problems. It worked well in Nevada. New York State had one with Honorable Judge Mark Farrell, who passed away a couple years ago. And it's important because we don't want to warehouse people. And if we know we're sending people to prison who already have a gambling problem, or some people might actually develop a gambling problem while they're in prison. So much like we have the drug courts in the state of New Jersey to help low-level offenders rehabilitate their lives out in society, we're also looking to do, do the same thing for low-level gambling offenders. And then you have, as you move through the rest of the model here, the various intercepts. You can see reentry and then community corrections. Reentry is important, right? Getting back into society, but then if you mess up, you're going back to prison again. So here you start to see this concept of a violation, you go back to prison, right? This revolving door. And you have parole and probation as well. I was on a supervised release program. I spent my time away, and then I was granted an opportunity to be in a supervised release program, which was similar to parole or probation. It was called the Intensive Supervision Program, ISP. And it was very similar to parole or probation, only I couldn't leave the state, had to stay in the state, had a curfew, had to have a job, had to do community service, had a checklist of about 36 things that had to be done, rules to follow. No gambling, no drinking, no drug use, random tests any hour of the night. I used to have an officer come over 2 a.m, knock on the door, hey, pee in a cup. Okay, no problem. Drugs were never a problem in my life. Alcohol was never a huge problem in my life either. So I completed that program. I was on that program for 37 months and 10 days, over 3 years, because my restitution was so high. The normal time to complete the program is 18 months. So I basically did a double program, essentially. To this day, I still talk to my ISP officer. He helped change my life. He really did. And I was very thankful for that. I was fully committed to the process. When you work the process and you work the steps and you develop a relationship with it, it really can make a difference. You know, one of my favorite phrases, and I tell this when I'm speaking to guys who are on supervised release or when we go into the prisons and I'm talking with those who are incarcerated, the phrase I tell them is, rules without relationships leads to rebellion. If you're just so worried about following the rules all the time, and you don't take the time to develop a relationship with people, with a program, with whatever it is, develop a relationship, you're going to rebel. And for some of you, rebel might be getting out of here and then coming right back in because you're so focused on the rules and not the relationship. Rules without relationships leads to rebellion. Within the criminal justice population, we know that there's crime and stress, and there's a lot of stress. And guys will always talk about how they're stressing. Don't stress. I'm stressing. I've got a hearing coming up. I'm going to sit before the parole board, stressing about my job. I'm stressing if I'll have enough money on the books for commissary, right? And then when you start throwing gambling in, people start gambling because of all the stress. It's an easy escape. You can't drink in prison, although people do make their own. You can't do drugs in prison, although people do find ways to smuggle it in at times, right? These one-off stories. But gambling is very common and largely acceptable in prison, just like it is in society. It's a way that people pass time. It's a way that people stay calm. The corrections officers see it as maybe a mild concern at best. It keeps the peace. And as long as there's no fights breaking out from someone not paying prison debts, everything's fine. So gambling, though, can also cause added stress if you're losing. So now you already have enough stress in prison. You don't need more from a gambling problem. People that are in prison that committed amongst gamblers, right? So those who had gambling problems went to prison. Oftentimes it's for forgery, fraud, theft, embezzlement, white collar crimes, tax violations, running an illegal gambling operation. We don't see as many burglary or armed robbery for gambling. It's typically the other first three, although they do occur. And then domestic violence and assault from just the ongoing stress. There was a study in Florida done a number of years ago, and they screened 1,194 offenders in detention facilities. They used the lie bet test. And the lie bet is a 2-question test that simply asks, have you ever lied to someone close to you about your gambling? Have you ever felt the need to bet more and more money, right? So lying to someone close to you, betting more and more money, right? Increasing tolerance. If you answer yes to either one of those two, then there's concern that you might have a gambling problem, and you should probably go with a more robust full-scale screen like the South Oaks gambling screen or the DSM-5, something along those lines. What they found was that in offenders in these facilities, over 17% had problem gambling prevalence compared to 2% of the national population. So this definitely shows a dramatic increase and a need to screen for gambling problems in facilities. When we're doing intake, when you're doing an assessment, are you asking questions about someone's gambling? If you're a drug and alcohol counselor on today's webinar, are you asking your clients about their gambling? Gambling and alcohol are connected. 61% of people with a gambling problem also have an alcohol use problem. 60% have a nicotine dependency. We also see co-occurrence along with bipolar, mood disorder, anxiety, depression. There's a lot going on. The gambling can lead to a return to the drug use or the alcohol use, right? You could switch addictions to gambling, but then it can lead you right back to your original drug of choice. So we have to understand and treat the whole person. Gambling in prison, it's again, a mild to moderate correction concern. The staff sees it as mainly harmless. In the state of New Jersey, prior to COVID, we had the opportunity to go into the facilities and we work with the correction staff. Correction staff receives training. What does gambling problem look like? You know, I was always interested in how do you handle it? And there weren't a lot of violent natured acts, but there were several stories and it can escalate very quickly. Okay, so these are things that we need to address, and we do trainings with the corrections officers. It's a leisure activity. It provides a sense of freedom. When freedom has been stripped from an individual, gambling in prison is one of those outside world activities that you can do inside prison. It feels just like you can kick back and relax. You're socializing with your friends, you're around a table, you're talking, you're doing something that perhaps you would be doing on the outside, as they say. Gambling for money doesn't occur, but it's the commissary items. That's their money. Personal favors, supplies, cigarettes. And a lot of people develop gambling problems while in jail. What we tend to see is that rates of gambling among inmates tends to continually be higher than that of the general population. We showed that before in that Florida sample. There was a study that Dr. Robert Williams conducted. Dr. Robert Williams is one of the two founders of the Stacked Deck program. It was Dr. Wood and Dr. Williams. And I know North Carolina is very familiar with Stacked Deck, as we are in New Jersey to a lesser degree. And we're very interested in the next, say 12 months or so to see how a Stacked Deck program can perhaps start to return to use in the schools and with our youth today. Dr. Williams did a review of 30 studies, and he found, and this is around the globe, he found that up to 1/3 of the prisoner population in 30 studies from around the world met the criteria for problem gambling. 1/3, 33%. That's very high. That's concerning. And why is it? We talked about gambling in prison. Why? What is the reason for the high rates of gambling and problem gambling? Well, people in prison perhaps struggle with managing behaviors, managing anger, maybe don't have good coping mechanisms, right? Reacting instead of responding, big difference there, right? Coping skills could maybe use some refining or some new learning. Some people don't have an identity. They don't know who they are. Some people don't know who they are without their criminal activities, so they have to redefine themselves. Some people don't know who they are without the gambling. I know I didn't know who I was without my gambling. My name was Dan the Gambling Man. That's what people referred to me as, who knew me, and I hated it because I hated being known as that, but there was also a part of me that loved it. It was my identity. So it's a struggle, right? Gambling in prison, people want to feel accepted. They want a quick fix solution. It provides relief from boredom and escape and socialization. I will say that in prisons, when you talk about the status of an offender, because even in prison, there's a hierarchy, and sex offenders are at the low bottom of the barrel in terms of status. especially if it's a crime against a child. And even in prison, they will sit at a table and gamble and feel accepted by other people. Gambling in prison culture, a lot of costs, right? We talk about the societal and family costs on gambling in prison. Let's not forget about the family. Society costs dollars and cents, costs a lot of money. But what about the family? The loved one is now spending time away from the kids, from the spouse. Now we have a reduction in income potentially, a reduction in responsibilities. The burden all falls now on the spouse who's living at home, maybe raising the children, maybe having to pay the mortgage, fight off the debt collectors, just trying to stay afloat. Oftentimes, the loved ones will say that the person who's in prison is going on a vacation because they don't have to worry about anything but themselves. Yes, their activity put them there and they're stripped of their freedom. They don't have to wake up and figure out how they're going to pay the bills every day. They're not worried about that. And I always laughed at that until I spent my time in prison. And I think that's 100% spot on. Because at the time, I wasn't concerned about how the mortgage was being paid. I'm in prison. I can't do much about it. And so the burden and the pain and the anger and the resentment that the family feels is excruciatingly high. There have been other studies of gamblers in prison. And what we typically find is that disordered gambling is associated with some of the things I mentioned before: social anxiety, depression, substance abuse, misuse, substance use disorder, impulsivity, and then also taking a look at current and also looking backward at childhood, ADHD symptoms, adverse childhood experiences, trauma, right? There was a study done in Oregon where there was a treatment program in one of the Oregon prisons. This is phenomenal. And what they found in the prison was that 38% of people were problem or at the time pathological gamblers. It shows you when the study was done because the term pathological hasn't been used in a couple of iterations of DSM. So we're talking a study done probably in the late 80s, early 90s. 12% of people that had been involved in gambling that were in prison had reported crimes, or they had a household member, and very few, 3%, apologize for the typo, had gotten previous help for gambling. A lot of times people don't know where the resources are, or they just don't know what to do because they figure that gambling, they're going to win again. Every so often they win something. So they probably don't have a problem. They have a money problem, not a gambling problem. That's what we hear a lot. I don't have a gambling problem. I have a money problem. If I had more money, then I wouldn't have a gambling problem. And so that's where the thinking, that stinking thinking comes in. They implemented a program called Becoming a Winner, which I'm very sensitive of names and I'm very sensitive of titles. And so when I see a program called Becoming a Winner, that would imply what? That I'm currently a loser. And so that's the first thing that jumps out at me is I would change the name of the program. Another example, in New Jersey, we had a recovery center. The name of the recovery center was called Lost Souls. That's just not a positive connotation. So Becoming a Winner was the name of this self-help manual. It was broken down. It was supplemented with 6 90-minute small group psychoed classes. They had pre-post test findings to measure and gauge changes in attitude, knowledge, etc. After 6 months, when they did a follow-up, they found 97% satisfaction rate with helpfulness of the program. So it was helpful. People learned more. And people in prison love getting outside knowledge. I'll tell you right now, I was always thankful for anything I could learn from the outside. I always gave it rave reviews because it was something that I could just help me feel some connection to the outside world. 88% did not currently have gambling problems, and 64% set and kept goals. That is so critical. Setting a goal and keeping it, and then accomplishing it, great dopamine boost organically. What are some of the barriers faced by prison cultures? Lack of awareness, stinking thinking, lack of leisure and recreational activities. People who struggle with gambling in prison have a hard time just connecting with others, building support systems. Okay, we always have to look at weighing the difference between punishing and warehousing versus treating an individual and trying to help improve their life. Punishing addiction is tricky, right? We need treatment for addiction. Warehousing in prison doesn't fix it. And it's not a simple solution. It's a multi-pronged approach that needs many stakeholders. There needs to be life skills. There needs to be resiliency. There needs to be coping mechanisms, right? Sometimes individuals might need medication as well. So it's a well-rounded effort. When we talk about prison reentry, we have to be aware that families' lack of trust is high. They're very skeptical. And that can become a huge issue, a big barrier if there's not support from family. Also, the family doesn't want help for a gambling problem because they don't see it as a problem for them. They'll say, oh, it's the other person who has the problem. We don't have an issue. But addiction is a family illness. It's a family disease. So if you're the loved one of someone who has a gambling problem, it's good to see counsel, good to see a counselor, good to go to a Gam-Anon meeting or a support group or maybe faith-based, whatever it might be, so that you can understand the nature of the addiction and your role and how to best handle it. We don't want to have enabling behavior, right? What Gam-Anon teaches the family members, 3 things. You didn't cause the problem, you can't control the problem, and you can't cure the problem. That's the 3 C's of Gam-Anon: cause, cure, and control, right? So we also see other reentry issues from the person coming out of prison. Hard time getting work. Hopefully they're not returning back to prior life of substance use or running with a crowd, right? That's what makes it so difficult. Trying to get yourself into new habits, finding a new way where the gambling and the addiction no longer fits in. We need services. We need GA. We need AA. We need NA. We need all types of recovery support systems. We need housing, clothing, food, transportation, identification. So it's very, very important. As we wrap through the last 5 or 6 minutes here, I want to leave a couple of moments for questions so I can get into the chat. And again, put any questions you have or observations. I see there's some chats in the screen, which I'll get to in a moment. Dr. DuPont is the founding president of the Institute for Behavioral Health. I was at a CADCA conference up in Maryland about 4 years ago, and he said the end goal of treatment is working toward a sustained and meaningful long-term recovery. I think that's so true. What's sustainable and meaningful is different for every person. That's why recovery has to be person-centered. No matter what their journey is, it has to be tailored to the individual. It is the individual's treatment plan, not yours. When we're working with people coming out of prison or facing incarceration or criminally justice involved, we want to be aware of the different types of resources. You know, whether it's a private lawyer, whether it's a federal defender's office, a public defender's office. Legal aid in New Jersey, we have an organization called the Association of Professionals Treating Problem Gamblers. You have diversion programs in various states, pretrial services, probation, parole, treatment professionals, including rehab facilities, inpatient, outpatient, and also 12-step recovery groups like Gamblers Anonymous. There's Smart Recovery. There's faith-based institutions. How do you screen for gambling? I mentioned before, and I would be remiss if I didn't give you some of this information. You have to ask people questions about their gambling. So what's the quickest way to do it? That lie bet, that 2-question test. Have you ever lied to someone close to you about your gambling? Have you ever felt the need to bet more and more? If they answer yes to either one, then do the 20 questions of Gamblers Anonymous, or perhaps the South Oaks Gambling Screen, or the DSM-5. We want to help people create a recovery culture where the addiction no longer fits in. We want to have people laugh. We want to encourage people to develop those life skills, put multiple tools in the tool belt. That phrase HALT, I love the phrase HALT. I'm sure many of you know and have heard of HALT. If you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, you're at risk. Hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, you're at risk. Take care of those. Meet your basic needs, right? We all want to feel safe. We all need a safe space. We need to help clients and help people create a safe space. Because when we do that, we start seeing these strengths in recovery. Because what's commonly cited as strengths for someone's long-term, sustainable, and meaningful recovery is that recovery group participation, right? They're not just showing up to a meeting, but they're actually participating. They have support networks. They have relationships. They have employment. And they're committed to change and transform. Barriers, though, is when we start seeing all of the issues that people are faced with every day. It is such a system riddled with so many holes and so much difficulty to line people up I commend anyone who's working hard to try to help the other individuals that need that assistance, because we're facing housing, transportation, substance use issues. You're dealing with people who are comfortable taking risks. It's in their personality. It's in their DNA. They're risk taking, right? They have criminal justice involvement. They have a jacket. They have history. They have involvement, and they lack meaningful relationships. These are all the barriers to recovery. So let's create a good attitude of recovery. Let's help people be grateful. Let's help people have relationships, have love, be present. It's all vital. And as we go through and finish the principles of a meaningful recovery, I do refer to this little wheel several times, because as I think through somebody that calls our 800 Gambler helpline who's in need of help and support, I think through they need, there has to be many pathways. A person can choose any one of them. It has to treat the whole person. They're going to need peer support. They need to develop relationships. We want to be sensitive and mindful of someone's culture. Is there any trauma that needs to be addressed, or PTSD? What are their strengths? Maybe what is something that you like to do in the past? Let's get them working on that again. Having respect, saying please and thank you, and just being respectful of boundaries, and instilling hope. Hope is the pilot light that burns, right? If you have a furnace, it's the thing that keeps us going. And when the pilot light goes out, the rest of the house can't get warm. You got to keep that pilot light lit in order for hope to spring eternal. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, Robbie. And
hey, Dan.
Hey, you fixed it.
Hey, I love that circle, that last slide. And I think I've seen you present that before, so it was great. But man, great presentation. And thank you for taking the ball a little bit early on that handoff. I felt like the quarterback fumbling the ball. The star back was coming my way, and you took it.
Yeah, that's how we do it. That's
exactly.
how we do it. I want to just point out here, Heather made a good observation when we were watching the video. She made the same one that I always make, is that for gambling, you're a hope fiend.
Yeah.
You're always some kind of fiend, and gambling and hope fiend. Yeah, that's spot on. And I picked up on that one too, Heather. Thanks for pointing that out in the chat.
Yeah. And if you've got a minute, we have 1 minute. Well, now we're just at the top of the hour, but if I want to open, if you just have a couple of minutes, Dan, to stay on for maybe some questions. And I wanted to make comment, we're on the same wavelength here, hope fiend. That's the first time I'd seen that. And in a lot of our talks, Dan, that we do and that I do, I talk a lot about the differences and similarities between this disorder and substance use disorders. I talk a lot about hope because I think that's one of the subtle differences between the two disorders that can keep someone gambling despite consequences, right? That hope that, hey, I'm going to hit my reset button, right? So I really loved how that was positioned, and I want to make comment to that. And I wanted to make comment too, right after that, you spoke about I'll be happy when, and you used your own situation that you're in, which I'm in too. I'm moving as well. And that's something too to pass on to our gambling clients, is to be where your feet are, right? And to be happy with where you're at and with the process. So great stuff. So
I love that. One thing I want to point out too, and we talk about the gambling and the hope. There was a video, and I don't know if I've showed it in North Carolina. It's from the British Broadcasting Corporation. About a 4-minute video where they put a gentleman who was gambling, and they put him inside an MRI scanner while he was gambling to see his brain activation. And what they showed and concluded is that it's not just about the winning, right? It's also about the participation in the gambling that activates the brain, and the anticipation. So when your brain is activated, not just when you're playing the game, participating, but also anticipating the next win. So even if you lose, you're not where your feet are. You're thinking about the next one. And when you're constantly spinning a roulette wheel or even a slot machine every 5-10 seconds, if you're playing internet gambling, you're reinforcing this every 3, 5, 10 seconds. It's easy to see how people can take a simple thing and it becomes habitual and can lead to addiction.
Yeah, very well put. Yeah, the dopamine's flowing on that. I would imagine, but thank you. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Constantly. So
yeah,
Robbie, it's good to see you, and good luck with your move.
Yeah, thank you. And you too. And I want to thank everybody being on the call. And thank you for your patience with this. I'm too embarrassed to tell you guys what happened. I'll just say for anybody out there who does Zoom calls, check your volume settings, guys.
I knew it. Son of a gun. I was going to suggest it, but
well, I've got a new laptop. Excuses, but that's my story, and I'm going to stick with it. Hey, Dan, thank you so much. And thank you. Hey, your story's great. Thank you for self-disclosing. I want to say that too. I think it makes it just so much more impactful. You have a great energy. I think it's driven from a passion to help others with what you fight every day. And also, you're so informed and you speak with clarity. So thanks for coming on, and we look forward to the next one. Okay, man.
Thank you so
Okay.
much. Have a great
Thanks,
day,
guys.
brother.
Thanks, everybody.
all.
Have a great day, guys. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.